My name is Mara, and I am 28 years old. Until recently, I believed that loyalty to family was supposed to be rewarded with love, support, and mutual respect. But that illusion began to crack the day I watched my older sister, Rachel, recite my poem, word for word, emotion for emotion, while standing beneath the bright lights of our school auditorium and accepting applause as if it had poured from her own pen. I was 10 years old at the time, still wearing hairbands with butterflies and believing in the kind of magic that made your parents proud when you tried your best. I had spent weeks crafting that poem, waking up early before school, scribbling verses under my blanket by flashlight, trying to find the perfect words that would make sense of the way the world looked to a quiet, careful child. It was about our grandmother's garden, and how things could grow again even after long winters. I had submitted it quietly to a regional contest with the encouragement of my teacher, who told me that my writing had soul, something that could not be taught. When the letter came in the mail weeks later, I thought it was a mistake. A gold-sealed envelope addressed to me, with an official notice saying I had won first place in the under 12 category. My mother gasped, clutching the envelope with theatrical pride. Rachel, leaning on the kitchen counter with her ever-present glossy lips and a half-eaten apple, gave me a look I'd later learned to name, envy disguised as patronizing interest. She said she was proud of me, called me her little genius, and that night she asked if she could read my poem again, just once more, because she loved it so much. I believed her. 1 week later, our school held a talent showcase. Rachel, ever the shining star of the family, had secured a slot to perform spoken word poetry, a category that I hadn't even known existed until that afternoon. I sat in the front row with our parents, my little legs swinging above the floor, clutching a program with her name neatly typed beside original poem recitation. I still remember the air that evening, the way it thickened as she began to speak, word for word, line for line, my words, my voice, my meaning. She wore my poem like a crown, polished and gleaming under the auditorium lights. When the crowd erupted into applause, my parents were the loudest. My father wiped a tear. My mother whispered, "She really is something else, isn't she? The way she captures emotion, our little Maya Angelou." I felt my chest crack in a quiet, internal way. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I clapped, because that's what good daughters do. That night, I asked Rachel why she hadn't told me she was going to read my poem. She waved me off with a scoff, saying I had so many notebooks, she didn't think I'd even notice. And then she added the dagger, "Besides, you'd never be able to perform it like that." She smirked, like she'd just taught me a valuable life lesson. And maybe she had. From that point on, it was like I was permanently cast in the role of the understudy to my own life. At home, I was the steady one, the helper, the invisible glue that held things together behind the scenes. Rachel, on the other hand, danced through life in a blaze of brilliance that seemed untouchable. Teachers adored her. Neighbors complimented her endlessly. Even our pastor once called her a born leader. When something broke, Rachel blamed me. If her room was messy, I had borrowed her clothes. If the TV remote went missing, she swore I had taken it. Our mother always believed her. Rachel would never do that, she'd say, laughing lightly as she ruffled Rachel's hair and turned to me with a sigh. "You have to stop trying to get her in trouble, Mara. It's not becoming." Once, when I was 12, Rachel broke our mother's favorite vase, a blue porcelain heirloom from her grandmother. I found the pieces under the dining room table, carefully swept into a pile as if someone had panicked and then abandoned the cleanup halfway through. Rachel wasn't even home when I told Mom what happened. She listened with a patient smile and then said, "You know, Mara, you've always been a little clumsy. It's okay. Just be more careful next time." I never forgot how Rachel looked at me later that night, smug, untouchable, like a queen whose crown no one dared question. But it wasn't just at home. It was everywhere. In middle school, Rachel began sneaking into my room when she thought I was asleep. I know this because I caught her once, her hand flipping through my diary like it was her own personal novel. When I asked her what she was doing, she just laughed and said, "Relax, I'm just curious. You're so secretive all the time. It's creepy." The next week, one of my most private diary entries, one where I confessed my crush on a quiet boy in our science class, somehow made its way into the school gossip circuit. Girls I barely knew giggled when I passed. Rachel just shrugged when I confronted her, saying, "You shouldn't write things down if you don't want people to find them." I began locking the diary, then hiding it, then not writing at all. By the time I turned 16, my voice had been shrunk down to a whisper I barely recognized as mine. It was during that year that the school counselor suggested our family try therapy. Apparently, I had stopped speaking up in class. I didn't raise my hand anymore. I didn't eat lunch with others. Someone finally noticed the fading. I remember sitting on that beige couch, the smell of stale lavender and the clock ticking like a heartbeat. The therapist was kind-faced, middle-aged, with a clipboard and soft voice. She asked questions gently. I tried to answer them honestly, haltingly. I told her about Rachel reading my diary. About how it felt like my feelings didn't matter at home. About how I didn't know how to speak anymore without being corrected, or laughed at, or ignored. Then Rachel cried. Right there in the middle of the session, she turned on the tears like a faucet. Said she felt attacked. Said I was always jealous, and that it hurt her so much to know her sister thought so little of her. My mother pulled her into a hug. My father looked at me with disappointment. And the therapist, God, the therapist, nodded and said, "Mara, have you considered that Rachel might just be trying to connect with you in her own way?" That was the last time I spoke honestly in a family setting. I learned then that truth, when spoken by the wrong voice, could be rewritten. I learned that being the quiet one meant you had no witnesses. I learned that sometimes, even the people trained to help you, can be swayed by tears and charisma and a carefully constructed image. That day, something changed in me. Not loudly. Not in a way anyone could see. But deep inside, I made a decision. I would never again offer my truth as a gift to people who used it as ammunition. And from that moment forward, I stopped expecting justice from my family. By the time I turned 24, I had built a quiet life that was, if not joyful, at least stable enough to breathe in. I lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment above a used bookstore, the kind of place that always smelled like sun-warmed paper and old ambition. The building had thin walls and no elevator, but my neighbors were kind, and the owner, an aging widow named Lorraine, often left baked goods outside my door just because she liked my quiet nature. I worked long hours as a paralegal at a small family law firm, where my attention to detail and ability to sit silently for hours cataloging case files made me oddly indispensable. My coworkers knew little about my personal life, and I liked it that way. I did not talk about my family, especially not my sister, whose shadow I was still slowly extracting from the folds of my own identity. Rachel, on the other hand, had become something of a digital fairy tale, the tragic heroine of a narrative only she seemed qualified to tell. What began as occasional Facebook posts about healing your inner child soon evolved into a full-blown persona. By the time I noticed, Rachel had amassed nearly 600,000 followers across platforms, with a TikTok account that went viral for its teary-eyed monologues delivered in softly lit rooms filled with crystals and lavender plants. In her videos, she sat cross-legged on a window seat that faced west so the golden hour kissed her cheek just so, and she spoke with a tremble in her voice that made strangers feel like protectors. "It's so hard to talk about this," she would begin, voice shaking, tears blinking prettily at the corners of her eyes. But growing up, I was the forgotten child. I had to become the caretaker because my parents didn't know how to handle my sister's outbursts. I stared at the screen the first time I saw that video, the cursor blinking in silent disbelief beside the paused frame of her pained expression. She had captioned it, "To everyone who grew up parenting their own siblings, you're not alone. #trauma recovery, #parentified child, #survivor strong." It had over 1 million views. The comments were worse. "You're so brave for sharing this. I wish I had a sister like you." I would have snapped. "You're an angel for surviving that. Sending you hugs and healing. She didn't deserve you." The "she" was me. At first, I thought it had to be a misunderstanding. Surely, she wasn't telling the world that I was the unstable one, the burden, the dark force in her otherwise golden adolescence. But then I watched more. Each video built upon the last like chapters in a memoir written in disappearing ink. There was one where she described the time I was locked in a closet for hours by my little sister after I told her she couldn't come to my birthday party. The music swelled in the background, an acoustic cover of A Mad World, as Rachel wiped a single tear from her cheek and said, "I thought I was going to die in there. But that wasn't what happened. I was 7. She was 10. She had shoved me into the closet as a joke, turning off the light and holding the door shut while I screamed and begged to be let out. When I finally stumbled out, red-faced and crying, she had laughed until she couldn't breathe, then told our parents I was being dramatic again. My mother had rolled her eyes and told me I needed thicker skin. Now that same memory had been rebranded as evidence of her suffering, a polished relic in her arsenal of viral victimhood. I confronted her once, early on, before I realized how deep the delusion had grown roots. I texted her a link to one of her videos and asked, "What is this?" Her reply came swiftly, airy and unbothered. "It's my truth. You have your version, and I have mine. Let it go, Mara. Let it go." As if years of being diminished, manipulated, and silenced could be discarded like lint on a sleeve. The worst part wasn't the lies, it was the way people believed them. Old high school friends I hadn't spoken to in years started unfollowing me on social media. A former classmate, who once cried in my lap after her boyfriend cheated on her, now shared Rachel's videos with captions like, "Wow. Just wow. Sending love to survivors." Even the ones who didn't fully believe her grew uncomfortable around me, as if proximity to my presence might somehow make them complicit in emotional abuse. One day, I ran into a girl I'd once been close with, Jade, someone who used to spend hours in my room talking about books and boys and the future. She spotted me at the grocery store, her cart already half full of organic yogurt and almond milk. Her eyes widened, then softened into something like pity. "Oh, hey," she said, tucking her hair behind her ear. "I've been meaning to reach out. I saw Rachel's page. I didn't know things were that bad." She didn't say your fault. She didn't have to. It hung in the air between us like smoke. "It wasn't like that," I said carefully, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Yeah, no, I get it," she replied quickly, too quickly. "Everyone has their version, right?" Her smile was tight, already preparing to pivot away. She didn't ask to catch up. She didn't ask how I was. She just nodded, said, "Take care," and disappeared down the bread aisle like I was contagious. The final thread snapped at a family dinner. It had been my father's birthday, one of those obligatory gatherings I still occasionally showed up for out of some deep-buried instinct for propriety. Rachel was there, of course, seated at the head of the table beside our mother, dressed in an off-the-shoulder cream blouse and delicate gold hoops that caught the light every time she leaned forward to accept another compliment about her important work. "You're really helping people," my aunt gushed as she passed Rachel the salad. "You're giving a voice to so many who've been through the same thing." Rachel smiled demurely. "I just speak my truth. It's all I can do." My mother nodded solemnly, placing her hand over Rachel's like a proud mentor. "It's been a long journey for her," she said, her voice thick with sentiment. "So much pain she's had to process. I'm just glad she's found a healthy way to heal." I don't know what it was that made me speak. Maybe the way they looked at her, like she was Joan of Arc in a soft filter. Maybe it was the fact that my father, who once taught me how to ride a bike, had said nothing at all that night, not even a greeting when I walked in. Or maybe it was just that I was tired of choking on silence. "Do you ever worry about the people you're lying about?" I said, my fork still in my hand. The table stilled. Rachel blinked once, slow and wide-eyed. "Excuse me?" "You fabricate things," I continued. "You take moments from our childhood, twist them, add fake tears and music, and package them for likes. It's disgusting." Our mother interjected then, voice low but laced with steel. "Mara. She's just trying to heal. Don't make this about you." "I'm not making this about me," I said, heat rising in my cheeks. She did. She made it about me in every video where she rebrands my pain as her trauma. Rachel's eyes glistened, and for a split second I saw the gleam of performance behind the glassiness. "You don't understand what it's like to hold things in for years," she whispered. "To be punished for finally speaking up." "No," I said quietly. "That's exactly what I understand. Better than anyone." After that dinner, I didn't go home. I drove around for nearly 2 hours before finally parking outside my apartment and just sitting there in the dark, forehead against the steering wheel, willing myself not to scream. My phone vibrated in my lap. A new video alert. Rachel had gone live. I opened the app and saw her face, blotchy and tear-streaked, framed in warm lamplight. Her voice was trembling. "I had a hard conversation tonight," she said, eyes red and glistening. "Sometimes survivors are re-traumatized when we speak our truth, especially by the people who hurt us most." My name was never mentioned. It didn't have to be. But I recorded everything. The next time we fought, which didn't take long, I turned on the voice memo app on my phone and left it running in my purse. Rachel had shown up unannounced outside my building, demanding an apology for attacking her healing at the dinner. She was furious, spitting venom in that sweet soprano voice she reserved for intimate betrayal. "You think I care that none of it happened exactly the way I said?" she hissed. "People relate to me. That's what matters, not your stupid obsession with facts." "You're lying to hundreds of thousands of people," I said. She laughed, short and sharp. "Welcome to the internet." I had it all on tape. Every word. Every admission. A clear, irrefutable confession that her entire persona was built on manipulation. I uploaded the recording to a Google Drive, sent it to myself, backed it up in 2 places, and sat with my laptop open, ready to post it all. I stared at the upload button for nearly an hour. But the next day, she beat me to it. She posted a video titled, "My abuser tried to deepfake my voice to discredit me." The comments exploded. Tears, betrayal, outrage. She spoke of cyberstalking, of AI manipulation, of fear for her safety. She cried again, perfectly, beautifully. Her followers rushed to her defense. And I was painted as the villain once more. Because in the age of curated pain and aesthetic suffering, truth without charisma is just another story no one wants to hear. By the time I turned 30, my life had begun to resemble the kind of future I used to imagine while lying awake at night as a teenager, clutching a pillow like it was armor against a house that never felt like home. I lived in a light-filled bungalow on the outskirts of Portland with a garden I actually had time to tend and a partner who, for once, didn't treat my silence as a void to be filled, but as a space to be honored. His name was Ellis, and while our relationship didn't sparkle with the theatrics of romance novels, it was the kind of bond that steadied my pulse in storms and made even quiet Tuesday dinners feel like safety. After working my way up the legal ladder for years, I had finally left the firm where I'd learned to catalog other people's tragedies and started my own consulting business. It was small but sustainable, focused on ethics auditing and social media compliance, a niche I'd carved with quiet ferocity. I made enough to live comfortably and choose my clients, many of whom had no idea that the woman ensuring their online integrity had once been publicly accused of deepfaking her sister's trauma. I no longer attended family events. Christmas cards arrived, but none were signed by hand. My mother occasionally left voicemails, each one a study in disappointment, as if my absence were a moral failing rather than a boundary well earned. I listened to them sometimes, not because I longed for connection, but because hearing her voice reminded me of the woman I no longer needed permission from. Rachel, meanwhile, had turned into an empire. She had booked deals, sponsorships with holistic wellness brands, speaking engagements at Survivor Resilience conferences where she wept on cue and told sanitized stories of emotional violence wrapped in sisterhood. Her TikToks were now polished with professional lighting and subtle background music designed to draw tears. Her followers adored her. They sent her hand-knitted scarves and painted portraits of her inner child. They quoted her memoir pre-order blurb like scripture. She survived the silence. She found her voice. Now she tells her story. And I realized with a sickening clarity, this wasn't just performance anymore. It was publication. Permanent. Canonized. When the memoir deal was announced publicly, I was folding laundry. The press release was trending on my feed, shared by accounts I didn't even follow. Rachel's face, edited, luminous, unrecognizable, smiled beneath the title, Glass Houses, Breaking Through the Shards of Family Trauma. I stared at my screen, numb, a damp dish towel hanging limp in my hands. Inside that book, she would tell her version of our childhood. She would name me, even if she didn't use my name. She would twist the truth until strangers absorbed it as fact, until I became the permanent villain in the story of her becoming. This time, it wouldn't just be fleeting likes and comments. It would be a legacy. And that, I could not allow. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I planned. Quietly. Methodically. Like I had trained for this moment without even knowing. The first step was legal. Under an alias, I contacted the legal department of her publisher, a mid-sized New York press known for capitalizing on authentic female voices. I posed as a concerned party with knowledge of potential ethical violations in an upcoming release. I provided a heavily documented PDF, timestamps, comparison screenshots, archived forum posts, even a cross-reference chart showing her supposed diary excerpts lifted nearly word for word from obscure Reddit threads and a now-defunct trauma blog written by a woman named Clarissa James. I never said I was the sister in question. I didn't need to. My email signature bore the name Lee Marin, a fabricated identity with a real LLC behind it, one I'd established a year earlier for online privacy and freelance consulting. I knew how to write in legal tone, and I knew how to plant doubt without making threats. Within 72 hours, I received a response. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. The matter is being reviewed by our internal ethics team. The second step was strategic. I found one of her exes, Corey, a musician she dated in college during the early days of her online presence. Back then, Rachel had barely cracked a few thousand followers. Corey had been quiet, creative, kind-eyed in a way that made you think he'd never shout in anger. I tracked him through an old mutual connection on LinkedIn and sent a simple message. I believe you may have experienced something you haven't named yet. If you ever want to talk to someone who understands, I'm here. He replied 2 days later. We met at a coffee shop near the river, both unsure of what this conversation would cost us. But as we talked, Corey's posture slowly straightened, like he had been walking hunched for years and suddenly realized he could stand upright again. He told me how Rachel had rewritten his music into her stories, how she described their breakup as a trauma event that reactivated her childhood abuse, and how he lost a recording contract after one of her followers accused him of psychological manipulation based on a single vague post she made. He showed me the screenshots, the callouts, the threats. I didn't even speak for myself back then, he said, his voice shaking with restraint. I was so afraid of being labeled an abuser by proxy. I nodded, understanding the dread that comes from fighting someone who already owns the audience. I'm not asking you to go public, I told him. But if you ever want your side of the story to be told anonymously, I can help. He paused, then said, I think I do. The third step was storytelling. Under the name Lee Marin, I launched a Medium blog titled Behind the Velvet Curtain, The Performance of Pain in the Age of Influence. My first post was a careful, deliberate takedown, not of Rachel, not directly, but of the patterns she embodied. I spoke of the commodification of suffering, the way online personas reframe personal cruelty as marketable resilience, and how internet fame had become a shield for unchecked exploitation. I wrote about the sister figure, not by name, who used fabricated memories to create a parasocial empire, and how truth became irrelevant in the face of curated sincerity. The post gained traction slowly, then all at once. Shared on forums, linked in skeptical subreddits, circulated by authors who had once been pressured to conform to similar narratives. And then Rachel noticed. It began with a string of erratic posts on her Instagram story. Blurry photos of her journal pages, captions like, I've been targeted, pray for me, tweets accusing unnamed enemies of sabotage, a tearful live stream where she said, someone is trying to destroy me. They're obsessed with my past. They want to silence survivors. But the audience, once loyal and protective, had changed. They started asking questions. Why are there 3 different versions of your closet story? Didn't you say your sister moved away when you were 10? This post says she locked you in a closet at 12. Why do your diary entries match that Reddit post from 2016? Sponsors began quietly pulling out. A candle company issued a bland but unmistakable statement about reevaluating our partnerships. A conference rescinded their invitation. Her book, once heralded as a must-read, was now under review due to unresolved discrepancies. And still, I never revealed myself. I simply watched the consequences unfold like a tide rolling back, revealing all the debris buried beneath the sand. The final blow came with an email. Rachel, breaking a 2-year silence, wrote to my personal address, one she had no business still knowing. The subject line was empty. The message was not, "I know this is you. I don't know how, but I feel it. You always hated me for surviving what broke you. You couldn't stand that I made beauty out of the mess. You've destroyed me. I have nothing now." I read it once. Then again. Then I deleted it. The next day, my mother called. Her voice was sharp, full of smoke and ash, the kind of tone reserved for funerals and betrayals. "You've destroyed your sister," she said, as if the words tasted like blood. "She has nothing now. Nothing left. Her name is ruined. She's been crying for days." For a moment, I said nothing. Then, with a calm I hadn't known I was capable of, I said, "She made me a villain. I made her a ghost." The silence on the other end was so heavy it felt like gravity. "I hope you're happy," my mother whispered. "No," I replied. "But I'm finally free." I was 43 the day the realtor unlocked the front door of the house where I had learned to disappear, and I stepped back inside with a breath that stuck somewhere between memory and resignation. The air was stale with abandonment, the kind of hush that settles after years of whispers and war, and yet it still smelled faintly of lemon polish and the lavender my mother used to place in bowls like it could soak up dysfunction. The house had been vacant for almost a year, listed quietly after my father's passing, which followed my mother's by just 9 months, as if her disapproval had tethered him to this world, and without it, he no longer knew where to stand. There had been no dramatic reconciliation, no bedside forgiveness. She died as she lived, convinced her eldest daughter was a holy wound and her youngest a calculated betrayal. I hadn't set foot in the house since the funeral, when I left before the eulogy, unable to stomach hearing her life summed in soft lies and satin fabric. But now, with the keys handed to me one last time, I returned not out of sentimentality but necessity. There were papers to collect, heirlooms to inventory, and a chapter to close before strangers picked apart our past and replaced it with white paint and open-concept kitchen dreams. Room by room, I wandered through the shell of my childhood, my footsteps tracing paths I once used to tiptoe between blame and blame's quieter cousin, silence. The hallway walls, once plastered with framed school pictures and Rachel's endless accolades, were now bare, the nail holes still visible like healed-over wounds that never quite forgot the shape of the scar. In what used to be Rachel's room, I found a shoebox in the back of the closet, half hidden behind a stack of untouched board games. Inside were faded Polaroids, mismatched earrings, and letters never sent, some addressed to boys, some to God, and one, unmistakably, to me. The handwriting was hers, still looped and practiced, slanting slightly like it always had when she was trying too hard to seem effortless. It began without preamble. "Mara, I won't send this because it will undo the version of myself I've worked so hard to build, and because you'll never believe it's real. But I need to write it anyway, even if it's only for the paper. Maybe we're both wrong. Or maybe we're both right. Or maybe it doesn't matter anymore because we've both become so committed to being seen as right that we don't know what it means to be real. I think I loved you more than anyone, and maybe that's why I had to destroy you first. You were always the version of me I couldn't be, still, quiet, enduring. That made me feel monstrous, so I turned you into one. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even want it. But if I could go back, I'd give you your words back. You were always better with them than I was." There was no date, no signature, just the echo of someone who had been so consumed by performance that even in her private confessions, she couldn't fully drop the curtain. I held the letter in trembling hands, feeling not anger but something closer to the ache of an old injury that flares just before a storm. The question came unbidden, soft but sharp. Had I destroyed someone who was broken, rather than cruel? And if I had, did the distinction even matter after all these years? Outside the window, a bird landed on the rusted gutter, chirping obliviously as if the world wasn't wrapped in layers of ghosts and guilt. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the box, and sat on the edge of the bed she once claimed with royal flair and unrelenting certainty. The silence felt different now, not heavy, not hostile, just hollow. I didn't hear from Rachel again, not directly. Her digital presence vanished slowly, like a sunken ship slipping beneath the surface over time rather than in a single dramatic plunge. First went the sponsorships, then the blog post. Her last Instagram photo, an out-of-focus shot of a shoreline at dusk, had no caption, no tags, just a single comment left by someone anonymous. "Hope you found what you were looking for." Rumors eventually surfaced, of course. An ex-manager mentioned she might be in Lisbon, painting. A Reddit thread speculated she was working under a new name, ghostwriting, healing fiction, for influencers who couldn't string together their own narratives. A friend of a friend claimed she'd seen Rachel at a retreat in Costa Rica, barefoot and serene, chanting forgiveness mantras over a bonfire of rose petals and shame. But I stopped looking. Not because I didn't care, God, I cared too much, but because I knew any version of her I tried to chase would only be another story, another performance, another mask designed to survive whatever truth threatened her latest reinvention. Instead, I built a quieter life. Ellis and I bought a small piece of land near the coast, where we planted lavender and raised rescue dogs and occasionally held poetry nights for local artists. My business grew slowly, then steadily, and I took on fewer clients but more meaningful work: mentorship, advocacy, ethics training. I finally published my own book, a guide for young women navigating toxic workplace cultures, written under my real name and with none of the artifice I'd once learned to wear like armor. And then, last month, I received an email that made the hair on my arms stand up with recognition and dissonance. The subject line read simply, "I think she loved you." The sender was a young woman named Eliza, writing from a counseling center in Montreal. She introduced herself as a recovery coach, newly certified, working with women rebuilding from relational trauma. She said she had been mentored by Rachel during her brief stint as a volunteer counselor under an assumed name, Anna Leith. "I didn't know who she really was," Eliza wrote. None of us did. But she spoke often of her sister, the one she hurt most, the one she admired more than anyone. She said you were the real writer, the real survivor. And that if she had anything left to offer the world, it was because of what she learned by watching you survive her. There was an attachment, a photo of a quote scribbled on the inside of a journal cover. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering clearly and choosing not to use the memory as a weapon." The handwriting was Rachel's. I stared at the screen for a long time, unable to tell whether the tears stinging my eyes were for her, for me, or for the version of us that could never fully exist. Eliza ended her message by saying Rachel had left the center 6 months ago, leaving behind a canvas bag filled with donated books and a single scarf embroidered with our childhood nickname for each other, Mouse and Fox. She signed off with kindness, "If you'd ever like to talk about her, I'm here." I never replied. Instead, I returned one last time to the house that had begun it all, the sale final now, the attic needing to be cleared before the new owners arrived. Dust bloomed in the air as I pulled down the ladder and climbed into the space where so many versions of our lives had been packed away like forgotten costumes. There were boxes labeled Christmas, old toys, brittle books, and a plastic bin of photographs that had warped slightly from time and heat. Near the bottom was a burned photo, half-scorched, the edges curling inward like it had tried to consume itself. It was us. Rachel and I, maybe 6 and 9, sitting on the back porch eating popsicles, our faces sticky with sugar and sun. My eyes were closed in laughter. Hers were wide with mischief. Our knees touched. I held the photo gently, feeling the heat that once lived between us, the kind that could have become a fire of love if it hadn't been used to burn instead of warm. "She wrote a fable," I said softly, the words cracking on their way out. "I wrote a eulogy. And I finally let the ashes go."